Hello and welcome to episode 56 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, the Ohtani Roadshow has left New York, but it was a fun weekend to see the big man in town.
Yeah, it was interesting just to see like all the different stuff that kind of came with a superstar. I mean, there's no one else in baseball that brings what Ohtani does to a stadium, and it was cool to see Citi Field like full cheering. It was definitely a different atmosphere than it has been since the Mets sold off.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I saw there was one poster that said, "Please take my ligament." That was very funny. I think we all feel that way. If we could help Shohei, we would. But it's pretty awesome to see just the force that he is, and the not the circus, but just the crowd that he draws. Like you said, the Mets really haven't been doing much of anything, obviously post trade deadline. But cool to see him come and revitalize the stadium a little bit. Obviously, the news came out about him, tearing his UCL. I don't know what's going to happen on his pitching front, but clearly still hitting. Showed that at City too,
Yeah.
running the bases as well. So, obviously it's a shame. We want to see him continue to be a two-way player and be as dominant as he has. But the fact that he can continue this season, at least hitting, and hopefully secure another MVP for himself, I'm sure that'll make Angels fans happier. And I guess to that transition, talking about off seasons, right? I know that affects Ohtani kind of now with his sweepstakes come the winter. But one player that I do want to jump in at, and talk about as far as on the Mets is Pete Alonso. Obviously, he's settled in now. He's been on a good stretch here. Continues to get beamed by baseballs, which we don't love to see. And also, not that this is particularly new. We heard about what supposedly happened at the trade deadline, the Mets taking offers on Alonso and things of that nature. But obviously a report just came out from Bob Nightingale saying that the Mets are going to look to trade Alonso in the offseason and anyone who's not in control past 2024. Again, it doesn't surprise me as far as if they're going to shop him, but it's surprising that at this point that something like that would come out like so, set in stone or whatever it may be. But, We'll get into this, how we feel as far as Alonso and what they should do long term and things of that nature. But just want to get kind of your initial reactions to, I guess that report's coming out as far as that it sounds so set in stone about the trade, the future trade, that could happen or something.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone over the last month just a number of different reports out there. I think it kind of started with the Athletic on like the
Sure.
day of their trade deadline, them saying that the Mets had listened to him, but he's sticking. Um, and that's normal. I mean, the Mets were selling off some pieces, and they sold some pieces that could have been useful for 2024, and they don't have an extension with Alonso yet. So it's only natural to listen to offers for a player like
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, it's stupid to be like this guy's untouchable when he's only with the organization for another year beyond the season you're playing. So I do think some of that stuff is a little overblown about how close anything was. Like I don't believe
Sure.
the Brewers report at all. I mean, that came from a Brewers front office that has
Right.
a didn't want Cohen to be an owner, and B then has been ticked off at the last couple of years of Steve Cohen trying to take their head executive in
Right.
David Stearns, and it sounds like all points are leading to David Stearns becoming the Mets head baseball guy now that he's out of his contract there. So I mean that you have to use some context and some common sense when you
Mm-hmm.
get these reports too, and try to figure out where they're coming from to see if they made any sense. I mean, the Mets quote in that piece was that they were never even close. So I
Sure.
mean, and again, the Mets would never admit they're close either. But
Right.
from the context, it just doesn't make sense that they were close. I don't think it makes a ton of sense to trade Alonso in the offseason unless the Mets and him are just so far apart in
Right.
their
Right.
price range. If it's just crazy, and I just I have a tough time assuming that Alonso is pricing himself out of Steve Cohen. Like that processing that just doesn't make a whole again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that Cohen we know is looking to keep players that are good players, homegrown players in New York. And it's way more than that with Alonso too, right? It's not just the fact that he's one of the best sluggers in baseball. He's
Right.
also one of the best philanthropists in
Mm-hmm.
baseball. He just got an award for that. That has value. He's a he's a big seller of everything Mets. Like
Sure.
every product that goes along with the Mets, he is one of the faces of this franchise and has been for since his rookie year, really. So
Sure.
um, and we know Cohen takes that into account. We know that with Edwin Diaz, that there was multiple reports, and I put one out there that
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the reasons why he was comfortable in giving Diaz such a deal, a record-setting deal, is because
Sure.
look, Diaz sells himself too. There's a lot of promos they do with Diaz, the walk-up
Right.
stuff, the different stuff. I mean, so there's that value in Alonso too. He sells merchandise. He brings people to the park. He does a lot of commercials for the Mets. I mean, this is something we're going to talk about when we talk Otani too, because
Right.
that's everyone we're talking about, but on steroids. What he brings value before he even steps on the field. So look, I until there's an extension, the Mets are going to talk to teams. It
Sure.
just
Sure.
makes good baseball sense. But to put a thing out now saying that he's expected to be traded,
Right.
um, I still don't see how you know that given
Right.
we don't have the head baseball guy in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Look, if it's not David Stearns, I just can't imagine that Billy Epler is going to be the top baseball guy. It was
Agreed.
never the Mets' intention to have him be that. They just got kind of into a pickle where um, they didn't get the other guys that they wanted. Um,
Right.
and the other guys weren't available. Now Stearns is available. All points lead to that happening. If it doesn't
Yep.
happen, the Mets have to have a good plan B this time of where they can shift to and get someone above Epler. Look, Epler has his positives. We've seen that with Senga and already Yamamoto already
Sure.
there, possibly Otani this offseason. We know he has his strengths in the Japanese market, and he did well at the trade deadline too. So there's some things to like there, but I still don't think he's the guy that Steve Cohen's wants to have a hold of the reins. So to have anything that says this is definitely happening this offseason when we don't know
Right.
really the
Right.
form of the front office, coaching staff, any of that stuff yet, I just don't think that holds a lot of weight. And overall, with Alonso, I think my overall point is I think he stays unless there's just some huge, huge difference between what the two sides want.
Yeah, I want to unpack kind of everything that point by point as far as what you're saying. I agree as far as and my first rebuttal to that as far as what you said was you don't know who's going to be running the Mets for by the winter, so that doesn't make sense. So I agree with you there. Um, I am in agreement that listen, so I see both sides in the sense of I understand the old adage of in baseball, especially the worst free agent contract to give out is to a first baseman 30 or over, right? We know that. We know that. But I also look at the saying you don't want to trade away or take away a player of Pete Alonso's caliber to then thinking hopefully you'll get that back in return someday when you already have that premier asset. So I don't want to see him go anywhere for the points that you mentioned. He loves New York. He handles playing here. He loves the spotlight. He represents the Mets really well. To the baseball point, much like Francisco Lindor, he plays every single day, and I think that should goes a long way. Myself, but also, I agree with Price. Like unfortunately, I guess the way the game is now, right? Like first base isn't valued as much as it used to be. I think we've seen that like with the likes of Olsen and Freeman, just kind of their market value and stuff like got paid well, but probably maybe a little less than like their numbers would say. But the way like kind of the sport is, right? First base isn't kind of a totally valued position like it used to be. So that being said, Pete can ask for whatever he wants, right? But he's going to have to look at what the other top guys in his position get. And he's going to have to settle at some point. So I agree that he's not going to necessarily want to price himself out unless he feels like his time in New York is over, right? Like he doesn't want to be here. But I don't get that sense from him. I am curious though, like for argument's sake, like what would you say would be a package that you think the Mets could an offer they can't refuse, so to speak, right? Like someone like what would be to you a package that would suffice to move a Pete Alonso?
I mean, they didn't do this at the deadline because they just went for, hey, let's make sure we really maximize the value and stuff. not that they wouldn't do that with Alonso, but
Right.
if you're trading a guy like Pete Alonso and a fan favorite like him, a guy that's going to
Hmm.
help you win a lot of games in 2024, I think it's clearly going to have to be someone that helps you win in 2024. It's a it's an elite young arm
Yep.
that's ready to come in the big leagues, has already some time in the big leagues. Maybe an outfielder that
Hmm.
again is in that position where he's going to play right now in the big leagues. Um, you're going to get additional pieces too, likely in a deal for Alonso. But yeah, I just think if it happened, it's got to be some guys that are going to help you win in
Sure.
2024. And kind of to your point about contract, I mean, when you're talking about Olsen and Freeman, both of those guys are good defenders. And
Hmm.
I know Mets fans kind of try to talk up Alonso as a defender, and he's
Sure.
certainly better than he was in the minors, but he actually hasn't been a very good defender in his major league career. He's been a
Right.
below average defender in his career. So you're looking at a guy that he's going to be DHing for
Right.
probably
Right.
more of that contract than he is playing
Sure.
first base.
Yep.
So that has to weigh into the Mets or any team that are giving Pete Alonso a contract. So I think that's something to look at. And I think another thing is if they called Mark Vientos up when they did, and he just went gangbusters, and he
Right.
had he had 15 home runs right now, and an OPS over 1,000, and not striking out a ton, or they had called up Mauricio, and
Right.
he was lighting the world on fire, something like that. That maybe makes you a little more likely because you know you have someone that can come into the lineup, play first base or play DH
Sure.
and replace some of that power. The Mets don't have any answers there at
No.
first base DH. I mean, uh, Vientos hasn't played very well, but he hasn't played a ton. He hasn't really gotten a chance, really.
Right.
And then he
Right.
had a wrist injury. He just came back. Mauricio's still in AAA. Beatty struggled, so he's in AAA. Um, the guy that's played best, I guess, Daniel Vogelback's been really good recently. But I mean, we're not putting all, no one's putting all their nuts in that basket of Vogelback replacing Pete Alonso. So that certainly would have, I mean, made the Mets more willing to listen
Right.
to
Sure.
Alonso if any three of those guys or someone else had stepped up and showed. But I mean, so this is a team, and in the second half they've hit some more home runs.
Sure.
DJ Stewart's helped that. Lindor's had a good power barrage. Alonso, even Vogelback, like I mentioned. So they've been hitting for some more power, but it's a team that's kind of historically struggled with that part of the offense and
Hmm.
scoring runs in general. So I'm not sure trading away one of the best power bats in the game is really furthering your lineup. Of course, it depends on what you get back. Like I said, if they got back
Right. Right.
a starting right fielder that's a powerful bat, and you got like a good pitcher with him that you just put right in
Right.
the rotation, like we that thing that kind of changes your perspective of it. But yeah, to put a bow on it, I'm gonna stick to the fact that unless we hear something else or something changes, that I'm not believing anything that WFAN random talkers are spitting crap about Alonso being bad in the clubhouse or any of that being part of
No.
any reason why the Mets would listen to him, listen to offers on him. It's just a good baseball move to listen to anyone that you have out there. I mean, look, the Brewers did it with Josh Hader for years.
Sure.
That
Sure.
he was on the block, and
Right.
they listened to offers to him for years, and they're like, we never got anything that sufficed, so they held on to him. A little different because they did it farther from free agency, but
Right.
it's that same type of thought process. Like, put the guy out there. If you get overwhelmed, if someone just throws a
Sure.
ridiculous offer at
Sure.
you, which happens sometimes, it does.
Yeah.
If someone throws a ridiculous offer at you, you take it. Like, you get in a position where you can't turn it down.
Right.
Which I think when you look at the Verlander trade, I think that's really kind of the position the Mets were
Sure.
in. I
Hmm.
mean, you can't really turn down Drew Gilbert and Ryan Clifford for him. I don't think you could really turn down the Max Scherzer offer either. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you got a top 50 prospect in baseball for a guy that wasn't an ace for you and pretty
Right.
clearly didn't really want to be on a team that he had questions about their future. So the Mets put themselves in those positions. They got deals that they felt like they couldn't turn away, and that didn't happen with Alonso. And they're going to have a high price tag on Alonso because of all
Hmm.
the things we mentioned of why they value him. So yeah, I think in the long run, unless there's just a wide margin there, I think that he stays with the Mets.
Yeah, listen, I hope so. And for everything like you said, and another good point that you brought up as well that I was thinking about also is there's no one else behind him in the minor league system that you could say, okay, we have this guy waiting in the wings that we can now make Alonso expendable. It's not there. And, we could debate this whether or not. In my opinion, Pete Alonso is the best power hitter, position player the Mets will have and have produced in the history of their franchise. You don't let that guy walk out the door. And like you said, it's understood to shop and play and do smart business. I understand that. And if somebody overwhelmingly, throws something at you, and especially if they're, super far apart in contract negotiations, I get that. But this is a guy you want to keep around. He's a cornerstone player. He's, to me, one of the 3 or 4 best power hitters in the sport. But the teammate thing is nonsense. Nonsense. I've talked to a couple of people in the sport, a couple of players that I interact with. The thought about Alonso is he gets the try hard moniker a bit. He gets the try, but a good teammate. And multiple people have said that same thing about him. When you face him, whatever else, he may be, Mr. Tryhard, Pizza Hut All-American, whatever you want to call it. But apparently he's a very good teammate and cares very much. So those kind of blind comments mean nothing to me. I'm sure the guys in the clubhouse, especially Lindor, who backs up Pete all the time, I'm sure if they didn't have a good relationship, Pete was a good teammate, wouldn't be the case. But, it'll be interesting. And, to put a bow on it, like you said, whoever's going to be running this team come winter is going to be, depend on what the fate's going to be there. So it'll be interesting to see. But, I want to move on from Alonso, and I do want to talk about Kodai Senga, who now, has put himself in that Rookie of the Year race. He's really pitched well the last month or so. Pitched great against the Angels the other day. Always smiling. Just seems like a great clubhouse guy. And the stuff is there. And we're really seeing now, I think, what the Mets expected and gave that, nice contract to in the offseason. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on what you've been seeing from Kodai, the last month or so. And, where you think he could stack up come next season and beyond here.
I mean, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but we talked about Senga pretty early
Sure.
on in them liking him. I was one of the first reports on the Mets
Mm-hmm.
having serious interest in him, and I mean, I was all aboard the Senga trade signing from the get-go. I thought he
Mm-hmm.
was a major league pitcher with ace upside. I use that word a lot, and that's what he's been, right? That's what he's been now for 2, 3 months. He's been an ace. He's gone 11 straight starts, not allowing more than 3 runs. He's in the top 10 most categories in the
Mm-hmm.
NL. He's been great, and we talked about it. It was like, hey, there's going to be an adjustment period for him um, with the ball, the mounds,
Right.
pitching in a different country, all of this stuff, and it was really cool. It felt like almost like a culmination of on Japanese Heritage Night,
Sure.
Otani's first time at Citi Field, and Senga pitching really, really well. It was just, as a straight baseball fan, it was just an awesome night to see kind of all of
Yep.
that together. And as a Mets fan, yeah, you feel good about the fact that even though you don't have Verlander and Scherzer for the rotation next year, you have that guy that is, I mean, if he's not an ace, he's one of the best twos in baseball. So
Sure.
he's right there, and that feels it has to feel good for whoever's in the front office too to know that they have Senga, that he's finally settled in, and this is a guy next year that's going to be like a 3 ERA starting pitcher who makes 30 starts and strikes out a bunch of guys. And look, he's going to have times where he walks 4 or 5 guys a game, but he hasn't really had an issue with the home run ball. The ghost fork we've seen is for real. It's one of the best pitches in
Yep.
baseball.
Right.
It's been as advertised. I mean, he had 18 swings on it the other night and 15 whiffs. That's
Wow.
so ridiculous for
Yeah.
number for any pitch. It's just crazy to see that. So, um, yeah, he's been great. I think the Mets have got to be super happy about him. I do think maybe going down the stretch, you kind of limit him a little bit
Sure.
as we get down, kind of like what they're doing with Alvarez. They're kind of playing the uh,
Right.
pitch count game with Alvarez, and
Hmm.
I think you might see that with Senga too. Is just make sure, look, these games you want to play well and everything, but we also want to make sure Senga's ready to go for next year and ready
Yep.
to hopefully pitch in a bunch more games in the postseason next year. But and look, hopefully he can talk Yamamoto into signing with the Mets between
Yep.
him and
Yep.
Steve Cohen's money, Billy Epler's relationship. I mean, I that would just again from a baseball standpoint be fun because we've we haven't really seen that in the past, right? Where we've gotten multiple Japanese stars on the same
Sure.
team.
Sure.
So if that was able to happen, and I know some Mets fans might not know a ton about Yamamoto, but he, from a pitching standpoint,
Yep.
most people, if you talk to any scouts, they rate him above Senga and
Right.
have him as a player with even bigger upside than
Wow.
Senga. I mean, this is a guy that this year is likely going to win their equivalent of the Cy Young for the third straight year, and he's also won multiple MVP awards too.
Hmm.
Um, so every year his ERA is around 1.5, and he doesn't really walk guys. And yeah, this Yamamoto is the real deal too. So if they were able to head up a rotation with both of those guys and kind of fill in after, um, that would be a great start to a rotation. And it would just again, you want to talk about drawing baseball fans and to have two
Right.
Japanese pitchers in the same rotation and to be as good as they are. That would be terrific for the Mets. So I definitely think that'll be something to watch this offseason too to see if they can pair those two.
Yeah, absolutely right. We keep hearing buzz about that. I believe Yamamoto pitched in WBC this year too, and pitched
Mhm.
very well, if I'm not mistaken. He's only like 21 years old, if I'm correct on that. Also, young player. The upside there is awesome. And talking about like off season, right? Maybe not going to spend $300 million again, whatever it may be this off season. But like we've spoken about, I think they very well could sign a player like this, like Yamamoto, to solidify the front of that rotation with him and Senga, and then can still fill in with, there's a lot of back end rotation guys like Alex Woods of the world that are going to be available this offseason. They can kind of try and round the rotation on, but that would be a nice start. And again, signing Pete Alonso to an extension if they could. Those would be two very nice things to do in the winter. But speaking of pitching, Mike, I don't know if you saw it today, but the Cleveland Guardians designated our former friend Noah Syndergaard for assignment. Now, not that there's going to be any playoff stretches going on here in Queens this year, unfortunately, but you do need warm bodies. So, with that being said, do you think the Mets should take a flyer on Syndergaard for the rest of the year? I mean, he comes home, so to speak. Maybe he catches the lightning in a bottle for himself, to bring his stock up a little bit to get him a decent contract for this coming winter, and maybe and then again, the Mets can have just someone with an arm on the mound to finish the season out. So I'm just kind of curious what you think about all that. And especially
Well,
considering that the Guardians gave up Ahmed Rosario for Syndergaard.
yeah. So I mean, the Mets need a starter, right? Carlos Carrasco stunk again,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. Look, Carlos Carrasco's had a great year, and he's
Sure.
fought through a lot of stuff health-wise in his personal life
Mm-hmm.
to get to where he's been. And I certainly appreciate everything he's been through. But unfortunately, it looks like his career is coming to an end pretty
Yeah.
abruptly. And I don't think the Mets need to give him any more starts the rest of the year. Let him go out. I mean, the Mets aren't winning anything this year. Let him go out in the
Right.
bullpen. Keep him on the roster. Get him some
Sure.
innings still. I don't have any problem doing that. But I think whether it's Syndergaard, look, why not? I mean,
Right.
Syndergaard's still fairly youngish for a pitcher. Yeah, give him a shot. I don't have any issue with that. If it's not Syndergaard or someone else like that through waivers, I think you got to look at Mike Vassell. I mean, he's been great
Sure.
in his last four starts in AAA. He's got a 1.75 ERA in his last four. A couple weeks ago, he had a no hitter going into the eighth inning. He's looked much better. Look, as you've known, if you've been tracking any of the minor league stats in AAA, it's been like playing on the moon in the International League. I mean, you have Ronnie Mauricio who's running like a 830 OPS, and that's like league average there. The last time I checked, the league average ERA in that league was 5.28. So,
Wow.
I mean, you want to talk about the ball just flying out of ballparks. Yeah, so Vaxel's pitched well, and he's lined up. He started the same night that Carrasco did. So, yeah, whether it's Mike Vassell, which I think is probably the wiser move, but
Sure.
yeah, it doesn't hurt to take a look at Syndergaard. You're not losing anything by, I
Right.
mean, it's just a little bit of money that you have to commit to get Syndergaard to come in. So I'm all for that. Like you said, that the Mets are constantly calling people up and
Right.
DFA pitching, calling other guys up just to get fresh arms. So this time of year, yeah, that's the time of year. The Mets haven't transitioned it to it yet, which I kind of want to make a point about later. But this is the point in the season for a losing team where you really need to start taking looks at
Yep.
guys. These
Sure.
are auditions. They need to make sure they start taking looks at guys. But that's why I think Mike Vassell should be up. You need to know what you have in Mike Vassell, right? If he
Absolutely.
co- if he comes up and makes 4 or 5 really good starts in the big leagues before the season's over, and you evaluate him to be a big league pitcher, then you're like, oh hey, this is Vassell. This is a guy. He's a big league starter.
Right.
Now we don't have to spend as much on
Sure.
an
Sure.
arm to fill that role. Kind of like what we're seeing with Peterson, right?
Right.
He's showing us that hey, maybe this is. We've seen it from David Peterson before. He's been a
Yeah.
big league starter for a whole season before, and for a half a season before that. So he's kind of showing us he's made some adjustments and could be a piece. So the Mets need to do that. I think they've kind of missed that opportunity to this point. I mean, you got guys like I know he had a game-winning hit, but Rafael Ortega is a
Right.
32-year old
Sure.
that signed to a minor league deal in May. Abraham Almonte is a
Hmm.
34-year-old. Even a guy like Danny Mendick is probably going to get non-tendered this offseason at 30. Jonathan Arau is a younger guy, but he's hitting 100 in the big leagues
Right.
and was a minor league free agent, has really no future with the Mets. All of those guys, I mean, they don't really. Most of them are playing all every day. I would
Right.
rather see before his injury, Luke Ritter, unfortunately,
Right.
got uh, an oblique strain, and he's out for the year. He's leading the Mets minor leagues in home runs. And then Carlos Cortez is a guy that's played well in the minor leagues in AAA. He's having a really good year. Um, and look, Ronnie Mauricio, I think at some point is gotta come up.
I,
I've fought it most of the year just
right.
because I didn't think it was a fit at the time, but I think we're at this part of the season where look, he's played just almost strictly second base recently. He's
Hmm.
just staying there. So just call him up, let him play second base, and find out what you have. At this point, that's what they need to do. He's played enough AAA to this point
Right.
to kind of see what he is as a player.
Sure.
So call him up and get him some at bats. I mean, again, find out what you have in him before next season to see what else you need. Like I said, Carlos Cortez, I think I'd call him up and just look, see if he's going to be a bench player. He's Rule
Hmm.
5 eligible at the end of the year anyway, so you're going to need to kind of decide if you want to protect him.
Right.
Brandon McIlwain is another one who's played great in AAA recently. Look, he's not a big time prospect. He hadn't really adjusted to being a baseball player up until this year. He was a D1 QB for a
Right.
couple of years, and it looks like he's trying to start and putting everything together. He's played well at AAA. He had 2 home runs the other day, including a walk-off home run. He had 3 great catches in center field today. Again, maybe he's not a big leaguer, but look, Rafael Ortega is
Right.
not going to be on the Mets next year, and he's not a 25-year-old great athlete like McElwain is. So I just between them and some of the arms like Nate Lavender, who we've
Hmm.
mentioned before, Mike Vassell, who we already did mention, and a couple other arms there. I think you can't get too crazy with it because the expanded rosters only go to 28, but you
Right.
also have a bunch of guys on the active roster right now. Ones I've mentioned, some in the bullpen that just aren't part of the Mets plans. So let's see some of these younger guys you drafted.
Hmm.
Um, let's see some of these guys and see if you can find some pieces, hopefully, for the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. And it just makes and I was going to ask you about Mauricio, it just makes it just so much more puzzling to me. I mean, I understand to a certain point, you want to protect the player and things of that nature. They're trying to hide him for whatever deficiencies. But at some point, it's twofold, right? Like you said, you have to see what you have, especially in the year that you're having. This is the time to do it. And also, if you continue, you're trying to quote unquote hide him, right? Because you're trying to keep some sort of value. Teams, I'm sure, are going to pick up on that and understand that there's got to be some reason why you haven't called the kid up yet. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. We've been saying it, like you said, pretty much all season. We want to see him get a look, but now is the time. See what you have. Same thing with Vassell, like you said. It's like you said, audition time for next year for guys to show that they can contribute on the team for 2024 and beyond. So hopefully the Mets do the right thing there. Just to put a bow on the Syndergaard thing too, him getting DFA like just makes that trade so much stranger already. Because again, they traded Ahmed Rosario, who was a valuable player for them as a off the bench and played a lot of positions and stuff. Just did not make a whole lot of sense, and that makes that even worse. Now I don't know if he lasted a month.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk a lot of things about the Guardians that don't make a whole lot of sense simply because their owner doesn't want to spend money to keep good
Sure.
players. But we could do a whole episode on that and get into the A's and a bunch of other teams. But yeah, it kind of a weird trade that looks even worse. I mean, that was a team that was very much in contention for
Right.
the
Right.
division, not just the
Sure.
wild card, for the division
Yep.
when they made that trade. And I mean, obviously, it made headlines in Mets land because of look, two of the Mets' former top prospects
Yep.
were in
Yep.
that trade for each other, and it was just a weird kind of thing that happened. But yeah, I mean, the Guardians are certainly a puzzling organization. I mean, look, we haven't even mentioned very much Francisco Lindor, and it feels like I don't bring it up because I know he's a superstar. He's played like a superstar since coming to the Mets. He's third in WAR by Fangraphs since he came to the
Mm-hmm.
Mets among position players, and it still feels like to a portion of Mets fans that he's underappreciated, and it just blows my mind, and it it's hard to fathom sometimes, and that's why I know me and some other writers end up posting a lot of Lindor stats because we feel like we need to show just how good he
Sure.
has been with the Mets. He's been great. I mean,
Yep.
outside of the first year where he was actually a little better than most people give him
Sure.
credit for, he's been a superstar the last 2 years, and I I think maybe fans see that differently from a shortstop because they're expecting Alonso like offensive numbers, I guess. But
Sure.
look, when you're a Gold Glove caliber shortstop, the superstar offensive stats at shortstop are a little different. Like it's not to that same par, but this is a guy that's top 10 in WAR in baseball position players.
Right.
He's, I think he's actually fifth or sixth right now. So, and he was in, yeah, I think he was seventh last year. So yeah, it's 2 straight years of this guy being a superstar, which is exactly why the Mets got him from the Guardians. And it still seems like you still got fans that are disappointed in what he's done, or when you talk about him, like, well, he's just been a shortstop, just like a regular shortstop, and it's just not true. And I think when all the clubhouse stuff comes out too, all these reports that to me just feel like trying to push a narrative about
Mm-hmm.
the clubhouse being bad or anything like that. People start getting on Lindor like he should be a leader. I mean, if you talk to anyone that's in that clubhouse, around that clubhouse, Francisco Lindor is absolutely a leader. And you see it with little things around the team
Yeah.
that he does. He's absolutely a leader. And this is a guy, look, this is the type of guy that should be always getting embraced by Mets fans. He's a superstar that's going to be with the team for still a very, very long time. So, yeah, he's been fantastic. I mean, Lindor's been great, and I kind of just wanted to make sure that we touched on the fact that how good he's been. And look, through all of this, I mean, there was some weird stuff with Jason Kipnis. There was
Mm-hmm.
some other stuff with other reports about things. He stuck through it, said all the right
Handled it like a
things,
pro. Yeah.
handled everything like a pro, and has gone
Yep.
through all of that stuff. I mean, he certainly wasn't expecting the Mets to trade Verlander and Scherzer
Right.
and for
Right.
this to happen this year. And again, I said all the right things, done all the right things, and on top of that, is played like he has.
Sure. Yeah. No. I think certain portions of fans like to harp on the batting average, especially this year, and listen, that number's low. Sure, we see that. But like you tweet out almost on a weekly basis, you look at the rest of his offensive numbers, like you said, he's top 5 shortstop in the game, plays every single day, plays elite defense, runs the bases well. And listen, we talk about he was hitting 230, whatever it is, that's fine. In certain at bats, did he look like the Lindor from last year? No, not at times. But also that I've tried to explain that it's not the entire offense has changed from last year to this year. It's not just that one player, right? It seems like the entire offensive philosophy shifted from one year to the next. So you can't put that on one player. Alonso's sitting for a low average as well. We're still going to slug 45 home runs or whatever. You know what I mean? We like to. I think when guys get the big contract and things like that, right? Fans can get extra critical, but he's not. And as I've said earlier, he's not the problem. Lindor is not the problem. He was not the problem this year. He continues not to be the problem. Pitching doomed them this year, and a general manager that really made no depth moves at all to this roster, and was hoping that players would be healthy and overachieve, and it didn't happen. And it's much more that than I would say Lindor's faults or anything like that. He handles himself great. He loves New York. And like you said, and that's the other thing. Be here for a long time. That was Steve Cohen's first big move as owner of the Mets. So I kind of think of it as he could never get another hit. He's not going anywhere. That was Cohen's first big investment, and they're going to see that through. And I think as they should. He's been a great player, and he's a good guy. So hopefully they can build a team around a winning team around him the next couple of years, and people can get off his back a little bit because as we know, when Reyes left, and no offense, when we watched the Omar Quintanillas of the world play shortstop, you'll remember very fast that you like Francisco Lindor. So, perspective there. But speaking out great players, I want to put a bow on tonight. The Mets did announce that next year, long overdue, they're going to retire Darryl Strawberry and Doc Gooden's number 16 and 18. I think we know that fans felt like it should have happened for a while now. It's decent timing because of the way the season's going on that they announce it and stuff. So get fans a little excited for something, but just your initial reactions just on the number retirement and them doing that next year.
Yeah, I mean, Darryl Strawberry has the most home runs in franchise history. Doc Gooden is second or third in virtually every pitching category behind Tom Seaver and right in there with Jacob deGrom. So, yeah, I mean, both of them, I know they had their off the field issues with drugs. Both of them have seemingly done a good job of cleaning that up and recovering.
Sure.
And look, they're, like I said, two of the best players in Mets history. Yeah, you retire the numbers. It's just a slam dunk to me. Kind of sad that it didn't happen already.
Right.
Glad that it is happening. Look, Cohen is recognized that he needs to celebrate the Mets history. He's done this, and I think doing this now is a good time for it because look, the Mets have some other numbers. I mean, David Wright is going to get his number retired. It's just a matter of when. So to get these guys, obviously they've been waiting to get them in before David. It makes sense, and then you can kind of transition to some other numbers. Sure. David Wright obviously going to get. I think Gary Carter probably should.
I was just about to say if you're going to do, you put Hernandez in last year, you're going to do Doc and Straw, which obviously Carter has to be the fourth of that. Those are the four those 80s teams. They have to do that. I think maybe even before David Wright, honestly. Carter's not here. Unfortunately not going to be here for it. But if they do it right, it would be nice to have those guys all kind of get their numbers retired. Around the same time, just because you can't tell the history of the Mets without them, right? With those 80s teams, you really can't. And like you said, kudos to Cohen for understanding that since he's bought the team and recognizing that, for a team that's not had a ton of success in almost 70 years or 61 years, I should say, they have a lot of iconic players that play for the franchise that came up with them. So it's nice that they're going to get their flowers, so to speak.
And one thing I kind of mentioned or was chatting with someone on Twitter is even though these guys might not be Hall of Famers for the major league standpoint, that doesn't really matter. What matters is what they did for this franchise.
Yep.
And they were two of the top 5 best players in the franchise history.
Absolutely.
Top 10, 5 to 10 in there. So it's just a no-brainer. And then, you just keep going with those players. I mean, David Wright, obviously, and Gary Carter. And then you keep going like Carlos Beltran, I think, gets in the conversation once you retire those two guys, and then um, you've pretty well covered a lot of like the
Right.
no-brainers, I think.
Yep.
But yeah, I just think it's just Cohen continuing to do a good job and exactly what the players that they should have already probably done with the Wilpons, and now Cohen's kind of cleaning up after them and making sure that he recognizes these guys. And I thought it was a nice piece too that Howie Roach tweeted out that they're going to do it on separate nights too. I
Right.
think that's a
Right.
really important
Absolutely.
thing to make
Yep.
sure that these guys get each of their own nights this to
Sure.
celebrate what they're doing, celebrate what they did for the Mets. I mean, the, I wasn't alive when these guys came up, but just to go back and watch the highlights or even look at the stats, especially with like Doc Gooden's first couple of years,
Sure.
and
Sure.
these were guys that were on those Hall of Fame paths. Like these guys
Right.
were going to be no-brainer Hall of Famers. Like that's what everyone's thoughts were at the time,
Yep.
and obviously they helped win a World
Right.
Series in New York. So yeah, just two no-brainers, and it'll be great to see them at Citi Field next year getting their numbers put up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. It's glad they both get their flowers on separate nights. They get their own. That's awesome. And that, listen, this year's not a success. We understand that, but you just little things you see that this organization has come a long way, right? With new ownership and stuff, and they continue to seemingly do the right thing with a lot. So I appreciate that, and hopefully it'll be a competitive team. When they have those numbers retired, that'll be good. And also when they go to London next year in June, not just because I'm going, but hopefully it'll be good in general. But it's crazy how fast this season has seemingly went, even though it's not a lot of happy times to talk about. But still baseball to be played, right? Like you said, guys auditioning for roles next year, and it should be hopefully they finish the rest of month or 6 weeks here strong, and can kind of build some momentum into the next year. Even though I can argue that means absolutely nothing, but we don't need to do that tonight. That's okay. But we're gonna leave it there, guys. We'll catch you next week with everything else in Metsland. If Ronnie Mauricio, Mike Vassell, any of these guys get called up, we're gonna bring it to you here first and break it down. But until that, enjoy the rest of your week, guys, and always let's go Mets.